I want to say thank you for BostonCHI for having me. This is a topic that I passionately believe about. I have been in the industry for a very long time. I've been designing and coding pages since 1995, imagine that. And throughout the entire process, I've sort of been in the process of seeing UX go from information architecture to usability to really become something that's part of everyday life. You know, going from 1998 to where sort of UX was just a thing that people thought about. And we're like, well, I don't know about that. It's a luxury. To be something that's so essential now in the web and so essential in the process of mobile that part of my talk today was to talk about what's next in mobile. And what's next for us as user experience designers, us as developers, us designers. I feel so passionately about sort of UX and mobile that I know one of the co-founders of a company that actually built a tool to measure the mobile user experiences on real devices. So I really passionately believe about the topic where performance is really the key driving factor of a good user experience. So I'm going to do a little retrospect on mobile UX. And I really believe that to go into mobile UX, we need to really take a step back into sort of the birth of mobile. Even though mobile's been around, we've had, handheld devices, I really believe that the birth of it was 2007, when we have that device that we all own, a smartphone, that pretty much is everywhere. All right, so I'll put mine here and make sure nobody calls me. And let's go back in time a little bit. To really get the conversation, we've got to roll our really speedometers back, try to get to 85 miles per hour and see what happens. And so I'm going to talk about going back in time, and I'm just going to use our friend Jobs as an indicator. Here's the desktop in 1998. Everybody wants a web page. They want it now. They're like, give me a web page. I want it now. I don't really care about design or UX. I just want it. We've all seen web pages. We were all around, hopefully around, everybody's been around since 1998. Oh, it's like, I'm a little too young for that. I don't know. Let's roll the clock. Let's go into our time machine and move forward in time. It's 2007. We've got another different kind of Jobs. A little older, a little grizzled, and that little iMac is now really small. But wait, where's mobile at that point? Just like the desktop. Everybody wants it. Oh, now everybody wants an app. They want it right now. The immediacy and design is really basic. And so let's move forward from there, because I really love this. This is 2008. This is a UX professional that I'm never going to say who this person is. I think this was even in my book. We were brought onto a consulting project, and this is someone who is all about metrics and conversions, and it's all about measuring customer interaction and all about measuring everything that good UX and usability and designers need to do. And what comes out of his mouth? Hey man, can you make this more fun? And I'm like, wait, what do you say again? How am I going to put that in a graph? Fun versus lame, engaging versus not so engaging. And this is a UX person talking. So at its infancy, it's something that people are just thinking it's a game, it's a toy. Move to 2008. This is also in my book. This is one of those screen captures that I took because I know I could one day show it. This is the Dunkin' Donuts app. Available at the App Store 2008. When you downloaded it, this is what you got. I have an entire section on terrible login screens. There's not even an explanation of what to do. You just download it and it's like, hey, it's a great login screen. All right, exactly. I think it's poopy brown. There's no logo. There's nothing about it. That is the state of UX in 2008. And then in 2010, we get responsive web design. And I really believe it is the rebirth of the mobile web. Had this not come around, you could even quote me. It's even in my book, I made reference to this as the mobile web was a bastard spec child that nobody wanted to talk to. They're like, oh, you have a mobile website. Oh, I'm so sorry. Cannot find an Objective-C developer? So this really breathes life into the web. And it's, that's why I gave it that yay. I think, I don't know. We'll talk about responsive web design a little bit soon. And then 2013. Everybody wants a responsive web design. They want it now, and design is basic. Really, nothing has changed in the decade. The only difference is now desktop and mobile have converged together. And people are now talking about it, and it's now important. And in our own anecdotes, 2012, we had a Marlin Mobile potential customer who said, guys, measuring mobile performance is great, but I get 1% of mobile traffic. I'm not really too concerned about it. A month ago, that guy said, when can I sign up? I get 60% of Android traffic. I'm drowning in tablet traffic. Help me. It's happening, it is here. And the reality is 2014. Quote me on this. Because people have yet to have understood this. Mobile is not the desktop. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the reality is that by 2014, there's now a shift. People are starting to talk about it, saying, wait a minute, mobile is not the desktop. Let's see what makes mobile different. So this is what I refer to as the mobile equation. You take a character, you times it by device, you times it by an operating system, you times it by a screen size. That's your mobile user experience. And that's what you're responsible for. For the UX designers, it's time to hide under the pillows. For the e-commerce managers that maybe here in the room, anyone has to do it, you're starting to panic right now. Because you might or might not have control of this chain, but your customer is responsible for it. And your customer is going to be viewing it, and it's your fault. And it's complicated. And here's a little bit of data that I pulled out. It's really complicated. This is just from our measurements. Don't quote me, but I haven't seen this around. There are 45 different versions of OS out there. The breakdown that I saw and I didn't put it in is 30% of that junk is iOS, 60% is Android. There are 55 different screen sizes out in the wild right now. 255 different carriers, and this is across like 50 countries or 50 countries or something ridiculous like that. There are 879 different device models of smartphones and tablets. And there's 1,400 different user agent profiles. And when I did this in November, it was 1,200. And it was about 607 device models. In a matter of a couple of months, it went up by 150 to 200. So this is a moving problem. This is not a desktop problem. This is a mobile problem. And this is my favorite slide. Everyone always, when they talk about mobile, they have their like, mobile is a hockey sticking and everybody's traffic is going like crazy. I don't care about that. This is the one slide that if you look at it, it says, let's take a look at mobile subscription usage from now to 2019. And right now it's 2.6 billion worldwide, it'll be 5.6 billion. So the people who say, well, I don't have a lot of mobile traffic. Do you want to wait a year, 2 years? Your desktop traffic is going to get overshadowed by mobile. Is mobile a priority? It has to be. It needs to be, because if you're waiting around 2015, where it's going up by 1.1 billion subscriptions, and that's a B. Like the letter. Sorry, I'm talking, so we start things out. All right. It's going up by 1 billion every year. This is the tidal wave that's going to be hitting every mobile site, every mobile app out there. So, is mobile UX important? Yes. Is it the desktop? It is not the desktop. I have a wonderful stat that I pulled out that it took to get 30 million sales of PCs, took over 25 years. To get 30 million sales of smartphones took about 2 to 3 years. And why it's really important, this is a great stat that I got at the end of last year. 48% of users say if they arrive to a business site that isn't working well on mobile, it means that the business simply doesn't care. So the translation and the connection between a bad mobile UX and a brand, it's pretty good. That 52% that's missing, that's going to be coming soon. So it's 2014, and let's talk about what's next in mobile UX. Because the reality is, if a mobile site or mobile app is slow, the customer is not going to blame the developer. They're not going to blame Akamai. They're not going to blame your data center. They're not going to blame your coder. They're not going to blame your content manager or anyone else in the chain. They're going to blame you guys. Because that's what they see. They're going to blame the UX and the UI. Because perception is reality. So how do we deal with that problem? The beginning of that issue of how to fix it is beginning to design at the root source. And for us as a group to talk about performance. There's a phrase that's out there called speed is king. Adamantly believe that. Speed is king. Performance isn't a crazy topic that we just came up with. These are some stats from Strange Loops that say, hey, every 100 milliseconds that Amazon saves, revenue goes up by 1%. This happens every day on the desktop. This happens, these are from 2005 and 2006. These are like up to 7, 8 years ago. Performance is an issue on the desktop. People are working on it. There's actually what's referred to as a culture of performance. Big money. They actually are performance teams out there, and I'll talk about that right now. And they all wear like socks and sandals, and they have conferences where they talk about performance. I've been to them. It's kind of crazy. They get really loud. They're all like 100 milliseconds. And same thing here. Look at the Shopzilla one. They're like an increase from 6 to 1.2 seconds, increased revenue, and increased pages. It's a real trend. It's real. And we are responsible as part of it. So, being that this is a group of UX people, I always like to include sketches because every UX person likes to sketch something up. I love to sketch something up. A couple of months ago, I did an Ignite presentation that's in 5 minutes. And they said, you gotta do it fast, you gotta do it sketchy. So I sketched out the whole time. It was kind of crazy, but way too sketchy. So here's a typical workflow. You've got requirements and design and prototypes and building and QA and release. And then there's these people out there that are ops people. And then within that, there are DevOps people. And then there are network people. And then there's us on the left side, the UX and creative people. And right now, this is where performance happens. At the entire end of the chain, this poor group of individuals are given a mop and a brush, and they're like, hey, by the way, can you clean this mess up? And these poor people, you have these conversations with them, and they're like, oh, I got 100 milliseconds by shaving this little trick and that little trick. And they're like, well, I got this other thing. And they're like having a hard time. Because the reality is, it's a lot of work to optimize for performance. And they're doing it over and over and over again. And the reality is, never the twain shall meet. Most big brands probably will, the UX and creative will never talk to a performance engineer or a DevOps person. They'll be like, hey, that's great, we made stuff, and you go fix it. Have a good time. And the reality of the situation is optimizing for performance shouldn't happen at the end. It needs to happen at the beginning. And it starts with UX. Because if you make and design a terrible product, and in the root of it, it's a terrible product, it doesn't matter how much time, how much dollars you throw at it, it's still going to be a terrible product. So why performance? The reality is, every UX, every usability, every creative, we test everything. I spent some time with Fidelity, and they tested every button, every permutation of the button. Somebody moves something to the left, oh, do an A/B test. Someone moves something to the right, oh, do an A/B test. someone actually changed the color. Like I remember working for when I was at Razorfish, I was working for T. Rowe Price, and we used to test the sliders. And so one day I went and said, change the color of the slider. And they would do an A/B test, and they'd be like, it works, automatically do it. And UX would drive the show, and it's important that we ask the tough questions at the beginning. We're literally measuring conversions, we're measuring on every button, on every screen layout, on every image. If you look at like Tom Tullis's research on eye tracking and how, eyes, looking at text increase conversion, it's a real thing. So, with that said, why don't we measure performance? Why don't we measure how fast things are? So, I'm going to do a little responsive design 101. And this is responsive design's dirty little secret. It doesn't like to tell you, it like usually puts it under its coat. It's like, oh, hey, I'm responsive design. We're friends. And oh, don't learn about this dirty little secret. Oh, I'm going to tell you. So here's a website. And like any responsive design, all responsive design does is there's no magic. It takes the screen, it squishes it smaller. And what it does in this case, that screen gets longer and longer and longer, to the point that if you measure this website on the desktop, it is 2 seconds. It is 1.98 megabytes to load. It has 133 different page elements. And when you look at it on mobile, it takes anywhere. I got measurements from 7 seconds to 12 seconds. Who's going to sit through that? And guess what? This is what I call the responsive design conundrum. You want it, it's great, but it's going to hurt you. It is your entry to mobile. It is a quick way to get a brand into mobile, but you're stepping into it. Because inherently, these two pages are exactly the same. And there are thought leaders that talk about responsive design. There's a great thought leader called Jason Grigsby, and he always writes about, the power of responsive design. And I was interviewing him for the book, and I said, Jason, you're not responsive design. He said, well, what are you talking about? That's everything I write about. I said, you're responsive design 2.0. You're thinking different. A typical responsive design isn't using any tricks. They're not changing images. They're just taking the page, squishing it, and delivering it, and saying, we're mobile, everybody. So what's the solution for us? The solution can be brought into 3 simple bullet points. They're not that simple, I just want to put them together as simple points. The first one is, from a UX side, from the beginning of the chain in that pipeline, we've got to actually benchmark experiences. We've got to test prototypes, and we actually have to design for mobile. And I'll talk a little bit about design for mobile, because I'm not talking about small screen. I'm not talking about, is it going to work on an iPad? We're really talking about designing for mobile performance. And here's the key thing about benchmarking. You've got to actually figure out whether you're making something better or worse. If you're working on a web experience or mobile experience, did we make something better? Other than changing, did we make it slower or faster? We need to know. The second one, we need to know how fast is my competition. The other thing is, we build so much into requirements. What browsers it should work with, what users should work with, what conversion rate it needs to run at. We need to actually build into the requirements how fast should it be, and actually hold it to ourselves. Because the reality is we need to ask the hard questions. But surprise, for UI and UX people, we're not ready to ask the hard questions. It's just another one. We're already that person that says, hey, did you think about conversion? Did you think about the user? Did you think about the business goal? Those questions are already asked. And you know what? People listen to UX. 10 years ago, different story. Now, UX is key. So here's a little bit about the power of benchmarking. And this came from Marlin Mobile. That's Costco at 14.8 seconds. That's Target at 5.1 seconds. And that's Walmart at 2.5 seconds. If I'm a retailer and my competition is Walmart, Target, or Costco, I need to know this. Because in reality, somebody at Walmart's doing something right. And if my experience is 6 to 7 seconds on my iPhone, and that iPhone has a big, beautiful home button that you can click on and automatically leave whatever web page you're looking at, guess where your customer's going to go to? They're going to go to Walmart. They're not even going to think about it. If you're over 6 seconds, they're going to go to Target. Well, then Costco knows Costco. Sorry, Costco. I'm going to beat up some brands here, but it's okay. The other part of the benchmark is you got to know your mobile users. Your desktop and your mobile users are not the same ones. And we're not talking about patterns. We're not talking about archetypes. We're not talking about personas. We're talking about performance. So here's a graph that shows pretty much a pile of different iPhones and Android phones. And if your customers are on the right, under 5 seconds, you can give them a lot more things to do. If your customers are in an HTC Evo 3D, they're crying right now. And this is Target.com. That is some sad customers. If you're on an Atrix or on these other, on the Galaxy Note, that I lovingly refer to as a shoe phone, they're having a bad mobile experience. And those customers on that left-hand side, that's who's calling your call center. That's who is submitting angry tickets that they hate you. That's who is actually going from Target.com to Walmart or to Amazon. And you need to look at where your customers are. And you need to design them. And again, if, there's an iPhone in there. If there's an iPhone 5 or 4 that's in the middle, you have to put it as part of your goals to say, are we okay with 5 seconds? Is that a medium or can we get better? So let's revisit responsive web design, and let's talk about it. And let's talk about one of the techniques about testing prototypes. And in UX and UI, we build prototypes all day long. Everyone builds a prototype. They're like, hey, I was thinking about doing this thing, build a prototype. Hey, I was thinking of getting coffee, I don't know, build a prototype. And so the technique I want to introduce for you is to measure those prototypes. And create a library of prototypes for yourself. That if you are actually working on different page layouts, different page designs, that you actually have somewhere, whether it be a conflicts page, whether it be an internal blog, a company intranet, to say, we tried these patterns and these work for us. So yes, you can go out and create this great, amazing interaction model, but if it doesn't work in performance, so I'm going to take this simple one, the small page versus the big page. Just like that Nixon watches company. Here's the difference. On several hundred phones in the real wild, on real end-user devices, the big page was 4.7 seconds, and the small page was 1.5. A difference of 68% performance difference. If I'm the guys at Nixon, the watch company I showed you, it doesn't matter what I do to that page. If the inherent UX design is broken, and they're loading in, and I'm not going to tell you, they're loading in over 80 different products on that one page, it doesn't matter what you do, you're never going to get under 5 seconds. You might sacrifice a couple of lambs, sacrifice a couple of cats, chickens, whatever someone's going to, get a shaman, still not going to happen. It's called, call the UX team, call your design house and say, we want a smaller page. Pagination. Simple JS script. And the page is paginated, and I automatically get 1.5 seconds, and then I can build all the graphics on top of that. So where do you measure this in the chain? You measure it everywhere. In typical UI UX fashion, like when I was at Fidelity, we always had design reviews. Do a design review. Get developers to sign off. Get designers to sign off. You measure the requirements. You start off, how fast are we? How fast is our competition? You measure it in the design phase. You measure it in the prototyping phase, and then build in QA. So by the time it gets to release, you already have an optimized mobile experience. And if somewhere in the path you lose something, you know who's responsible for it. And this is different than taking a mobile site or a mobile app and throwing it out into the wild and then having your customers inherently QA it. nothing is going to fix terrible bad reviews on the App Store. Nothing is going to fix going to a Facebook page and saying, this is a horrible mobile site. And this is things that we've seen by real customers who had terrible mobile performance or downtime, where the customers actually go to the Facebook page and actually tell the customer, hey guys, this website sucks. So how do you design for mobile? Here's a couple of mobile hacks. Mobile browsers are limited. They are not the desktop browser. They are not even close. I've had a couple of guys in Google that were like, no, man, it really, I'm like, are you high? Like, seriously. There's another presentation that I have where someone actually, a Googler, said, you should use this new image format. And so I opened it up, their page on my iPhone, and the images were broken. And I'm like, yeah, I love that new image format, but it doesn't work on Safari. Why would we implement it? The browser cache is tiny. It is absolutely minuscule compared. It is like trying to run 10 pounds of sugar in a 1-pound bag. It is not going to happen. And the reality, mobile devices are unique. They are not the desktop. And it doesn't mean we have to design like this. It doesn't mean we have to regress back to that wonderful copy page login screen with none information and nothing there. It doesn't mean we have to limit ourselves. It means we have to optimize how we design and how we put screens together. And so here's a couple of rules of thumb to deal with the limited browser problems. You have to design pages that work across all platforms. And what I'm talking about isn't about design. It's about things like touch events are JS-based, the JavaScript-based. And the reality is not all mobile browsers can deal with touch events. Not all mobile browsers can deal with swipes and the flicks and everything that we enjoy. It doesn't happen. So if you're loading in a pile of JavaScript and all these tools and Ajax to actually implement those, that's slowing you down. Like, we were measuring a customer site that uses pretty much a service that mobilizes their web page, and the biggest performance inhibitor was that mobilized service. And the JavaScript at the top of the page was like 4 seconds, 5 seconds. And it was like, wow, the service that's actually mobilizing your web page is slowing you down. How can you ever get a great customer experience for that? And the other thing, HTML5 doesn't work across everything. So there's a great image that's the compatibility that I screenshotted there from HTML5. And it's kind of a little spotty in WebKit, it's kind of a little spotty in iOS, and then you get to Amazon Silk, the browser for the Kindle, and it's like nothing, might as well go back to HTML1, nothing, would you let me book format instead? So, but if your customers are coming to your site from the Kindle, you need to design for them. Here's my other one. Mobile browser caches are small. And in order to deal with that, you need to reduce page elements, you need to reduce icons, you need to reduce images on the page. And to actually show you a real example, that image that's in back is referred to as a watercolor. And it's a rendering of all the DOMs of every page element renders like watercolor. And this is a retailer's website that you all have probably heard, and I'm not going to tell you who they are, who has 233 page elements for their mobile site. The website is 2.6 megabytes. And it took 20 seconds to load. We see people embedding fonts on mobile web pages. WebKit, like the WebKit browser, and you do, like, I want to do font face. I want to actually do custom fonts. You realize those fonts get loaded into a cache, and they represent 1 to 2 megabytes of the size. Why would you ever do that to somebody's data plan? And the other responsive design trick is the one where people scale images. They take a full-size 1 megabyte image, and they're like, we're going to responsive design this. We're just going to use the scale in CSS to reduce it by 50%. So now you're loading in 2 to 3 megabytes to a phone. Now imagine you go to that website constantly. I don't know, let's say you go 10 times a week. That's 20 megabytes on your data plan a week. Times it by 4, 80 megabytes on your data plan. That stuff is piling up. So you really got to think about that mobile experience. It's not the desktop. You cannot pile. That same website that I'm showing here, if you go onto Chrome on my laptop, it takes 1.8 seconds. Because I'm on a Wi-Fi connection with a 64-bit machine or whatever I'm on, whatever this thing is, it's fast. My iPhone 5 is still doing 20 seconds. And here's the other thing, mobile devices that we need. I can't tell you how many times I've actually talked to someone, and there's a big e-business firm that said, oh my God, we have a device lab. And I'm like, that is awesome. So what do you guys do with it? Now the customers come in and we're like, oh, cool, can I play with that iPad? And does it have Angry Birds on it? It's like, no, you don't get it. The device lab is not for your customers. Your device lab is not for your engineers. It is for your designers to take a look at the performance on individual devices to see what it looks like and how it runs. So you've got to test it on real devices. And you've got to test performance on real devices. And you've actually got to, there's a piece in my book that people laugh at this when I wrote it. People just think I'm crazy. And it's an exercise that I refer to as taking a walk. And I said, you want to see what your real mobile experience is? Go down to a carrier store, and there's a pile of all the fancy new phones, and install your app, and open your whole web page on all of them. And if you want to see the difference of every user experience on any phone, just hang out for an hour at a Verizon store. You'll notice it. And then once you're there, they'll be like, they're like, well, excuse me, sir, what are you doing? And just say, I'm checking out new phones. And they're like, have fun. Do you mind if I open web pages on them? Go ahead. Do you mind if I open apps to see what they look like? Please enjoy yourself. Okay then. All right. And the key one, again, the desktop is not mobile. The desktop is not moving around. The desktop is not in my pocket. The desktop is not being thrown in my bag while I check a web page on the green line and the red line and the silver line tonight. The desktop is not being thrown by my collar. You always say in a presentation, tell them again, benchmark, test prototypes, and design for mobile. And now the key question is, Adrian, how would I do this process?
Adrian, how would you do that process?
Well, let me offer up some free tools that you can use. So there's a couple of tools. Chrome actually has a tool where you can connect your phone or your tablet to your desktop, and you can actually measure the performance of that phone and tablet. And it's in the Chrome app. You have to install Chrome on one and Chrome on the other, and then you have to connect it together. But I'm not going to be a crazy person connecting it together, because then I just look like a crazy person that I already look like. As a UX person, you know what I'm talking about. You're like, oh, let me put a label on the subway and fix that. You all know what I'm talking about. We all, how many times as a UX person do you look at something and you're like, that is wrong. I should really do something and write a note or do that. We all do it. The people who are not UX people are like, oh, you guys are weird. No. All right, so that's one tool, but I'm not going to be walking around with my desktop and my phone and my laptop because I really look like a weirdo. Couple of months ago, my dev team was working on our product, and they were like, hey man, we thought of a great idea, and I said, hey guys, why don't you do this? Why don't you just give me a little field where I can test our browser and hit run so I don't have to go back and measure things over and over again. And I looked at that, and I looked at our CEO, and I looked at that, and I'm like, that thing's going on the App Store. And so we released a tool that is on our real mobile browser for free called Studio. And you can download it, you can put a URL in, and you can hit the measure button from wherever you are, and it gives you a number. And it gives you a performance number. And if you're really geeky, you can click on the waterfall chart and you get the waterfall chart. And that's pretty awesome. We're going to actually implement time to first paint too, which is like done and ready to go, that we were going to put it in and say, put it in there. I just fixed the CSS code this morning. So you're actually going to see the time to first paint. How many people know what time to first paint is? Time to first paint is when you're loading a web page and you see it pop up for the first time, even though the rest of the page hasn't loaded. That's time to first paint. It's very neat. Actually, I've been hanging out with the guys at Socks and Sandals and Velocity conferences with the DevOps people. They have another one that's called Time to First Interactive. It gets kind of crazy. It was like one of those conferences. They had an open bar, and the bartender sitting there like, "Would you like a drink?" This crowd isn't drinking at all. They weren't drinking at all, and I was like, wow, because you go to a UX conference and everybody's like, free booze, let's do this thing. You go to a design conference or an ad agency, they already show up drunk. And I'm like, guys, like, the party hasn't even started, you pre-gamed it. It's so true, it's so true. Nobody believes me. It's like, I work for an ad agency. If you ever see that episode in Mad Men where they work over the weekend, that's exactly how it is. All right, so here's a free tool. Any questions? Over there.
Time to first paint?
Time to first paint. That's how long it takes for something to actually paint on the screen. And time to first interactive is the time that when those things paint, that actually things become active. So like you could actually click on the button at time to first interactive.
Also, I've got a mic. Is it working now?
Yes. Yeah, so do you have a tool that resizes all the images for just the mobile sites, or what do you do when you...
No, there's actually a lot of great JavaScript out there. If you come grab me my card and email me, I'll actually email you a couple of blog posts from Jason Grigsby, the responsive design guy, who actually is talking about resizing images. So our tool does measure performance, but then other people can fix it.
Any other questions?
Well, there's gotta be a couple of questions. As long as you're not throwing pizza at me, I'm fine. Fine. Anybody? All right. I guess some good questions here.
Well, I'm coming here from a technical communication background, and we look at mobile, and we're used to writing manuals that may or may not be printed, quick reference cards that can be a physical laminated thing, and then online help systems, and all of our thinking is for the desktop, and we're aware of this, mobile thing, and we're cool with EPUB. We've gotten that far. And so I guess where we get stuck is that teeny little screen. Do you think there is a way to convey fairly complex procedural information on a teeny little screen?
No. Mobile users are not your desktop users. If you make them wait and scroll down that page of that, they will leave. What I love about the iPhone is it has what I refer to as the hello button. It is the goodbye, and it is the hello button that a mobile user can click instantaneously. And if something is, remember, you're not wanting to do exactly what they're going to do on the desktop. You might give them the table of contents. You might give them, say, hey, you want to search for abstracts. You want to sort of get them to lead. Remember, your mobile user isn't at home. They're going to be on a train. They're going to be in, how many of us actually surf in our cars? I kind of did, but I'm just like, oh, I'm just going to surf in the car. I'm looking for that. Don't tell the Brooklyn PD or anything between us. So it's bite-sized content. And that's the key of it. It's all about a bite-sized experience. I'm going to do little micro shots of usage and then put the phone away. And studies have seen that people use their phone more than their desktop, but they do it over smaller increments of time. Versus their desktop, think of it as perusal versus purposing. iOS users, Android users are perusing. They're looking at something, this is kind of cool, or they're just going to go in and say, I want this. I'm going to go to Amazon, I'm going to buy something. And that's why speed is king for this.
See, well, we think that our field has had a crisis of attracting younger people, and so we all get together with our gray hair and we say, well, the young people, they want everything to be on their phones. And so we're, struggling to figure out if it's even possible. It sounds like it's not. We don't think it's possible.
I think you have to change the metaphor to say what can you give them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key thing, is you're changing the user's perception, you're changing the user usage pattern, and you have to say, this is fact. It's not like, will they do it? Well, I force feed an experience. They just will never come back.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think there's a question over here somewhere. All right.
So for big companies, I can see they have the resources to design the mobile website from scratch. But for smaller companies that might not have the resources, are there any good automated tools for taking an existing website and making a performance mobile experience?
Well, the thing about performance is it's not about big company versus little company. Even people that are small shops, you're still responsible for your customer. If it's a terrible mobile experience, it doesn't matter if it was a team of 100 or a team of 1. If the mobile website sucks, it's going to suck. And even these tools, this is why tools like the Chrome Dev Tools and Speedier are available for you to actually put the process in. You're just taking the process and then making it smaller to say, I'm going to test this, and I'm going to try it over and over again. And I'm going to see whether or not as I add images, whether or not as I add text, whether or not as I add CSS, like I have a deck that you guys can do a search for and put it up on BostonCHI about the power of doing things like minimizing. And just minimizing, this is where you get rid of all the page breaks in all your code. On a mobile standpoint, it will save you 25 to 30% performance gain. Just by doing this dumb thing, if you actually take your CSS files and drop it into a minimizing code, it's about little wins. And that's the key thing, is like even the process of building a website, you still do a sitemap, you still design. Why does the process have to be different with performance?
As a non-UX person, but learning, and I've worked across different constituencies and ages, so the question this woman in the front who was addressing young people, I'm just wondering do UX designers bring in, let's say, user groups of different demographics to help aid them in the user experience that can
Absolutely. And the key of it is, the key goal is who's your audience, and your audience is never everybody. Your audience is who's your focus. You can't always cover everyone. The reality is that's the UX dilemma. You're never going to save it for everyone. You're going to save it for an exact group of people, and then you're going to sort of go from there. And the idea of it, and this is why we do usability studies and cafeteria studies, to really talk to our customers of what are they willing to do. I remember I did a study a couple of years ago, and I had a couple of my graduate students said, hey, can I look at the questions? And I said, sure. And I said, all right, I'm going to do freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and then graduate students. And they asked me, why did you ask age? I said, because anyone over the age of 40 will never give me their age. I'm never going to give someone my age. And they said, really? I said, versus, I turned around to one of my undergrad students, I said, if I ask you for your age, would you give it to me? And she said, yes. And I said, I bet you your phone number and address is on Facebook too. And she said, how'd you know? So again, it's what that age group, it's what that target audience is willing to do.
Another technical question. You said to not link fonts, and what do you do then? Do you just not make fonts download on the mobile when the mobile site hits your site?
Well, there's a couple of things. Like the one thing to never do, never do a base 64, and this is too deep. This is way, way, way too deep because I've been hanging out with that crowd of tech people. Never do a base 64 font. You might as well shoot yourself. And the reality is, remember, you are downloading into that cache. If you can get away with one, it's a trade-off. Remember, it's a mitigating circumstance. If it's really, really critical, and you need to have font fix, and you need to have that custom font, then it's a trade-off. You're going to have to trade off the logo, you're going to have to trade off something else for a performance gain. But if you look at some of the sites that have 4 fonts, 3 fonts, all at like 500K, 250K, you really got to take a look at the experience and say, do I need that font? Maybe not likely. Will it affect the user experience? No. That big waterfall chart with that company that loaded in 233 different images, on their mobile site, they have a picture of the product, and they have a little swatch of every color of the product, and they try to make them clickable. And I'm like, nobody has thumbs that small. So you really got to take a look at it, and this is why the key is good UX design to ask the questions. If you did a usability study and showed 2 different websites, mobile websites, and showed them that the font was different, I'll tell you right now, I bet you no one would even notice the difference. Now, if you tell them that the logo is pixelated and not pixelated, you're going to get hate mail and internet rage.
But is it, I think the question was, can you prevent the custom fonts come to your mobile site, but still use them on your regular desktop?
Yeah, and this is where you could use tools like JavaScript that actually loaded different CSS files. The problem is, remember, when you're using responsive web design, it uses the same CSS file that the desktop uses. So the desktop is loading 5 to 6 custom fonts, the mobile site's going to do it too. And it's a little bit more work to tailor those mobile sites, but done right, you're going to get a better experience for your customers.
Back here first.
Sorry. Sorry. First of all, your presentation was really interesting. You talked a lot about reducing page load times, and I imagine you could probably make that case really convincingly to companies, and then they'll turn around and say, "Oh, awesome! We'll just split all of our content into like triple the amount of pages, and then we're mobile. Now we're mobile, just like you said we are." So, do you have any insight related to that? I don't know, maybe not necessarily if you do have any actually usability metrics, but related to juggling that more pages versus just taking content out of the site.
Well, and the thing about it is that's a good example. One of my other examples in my book is one that I didn't say that it's a real customer reference, but what it was is a page that had comments. And it had comments and images. So what I did is I tested comments with images, like you would see on Facebook or something like that. And we looked at them and said, why don't you just paginate the comments? Because there was about 60, 70 comments that actually were making the page like go from here to China. And it was like going forever and forever. And I was just like, paginate these things. And they're like, oh, you're right. And sometimes it might not be that easy. That company with the 233, they asked, hey, yeah, we're a customer, can you kind of help us? And so I wrote an email that little did I know got forwarded to 16 different people. And when they asked the question, what technical techniques you should use, I said all of them. And truth being, the small companies, the small people can turn around and say, I'm going to fix this instantaneously. The larger companies, they're going to take some time to drive that shit. You might not be able to get them to paginate the page, but you might get them to use like CSS colors instead of actual little thumbnail images. And their customers would never notice. You might be able to get them to big strip some of their images or maybe make them just a little smaller and their customers would never notice. You might be able to get them to reduce a font here and there. So it's what I refer to as little wins. You're never like, one of the best responsive design sites, that's actually kind of a little slow too, is the Boston Globe. And I talked to, it's a beautiful site, everyone's, it won awards and everyone did great things. And I've talked to a couple of people, I even talked to the mobile product manager at the Boston Globe. And they said, the reason you can do it and do responsive web design is because they went to another website that had no traffic, they hit the reset button, and they started from scratch and they did big moves. And I talked to him just at Webino a couple of months ago. He's like, we're going to do it. We're going to go responsive web design. It's not responsive. It's still not even there yet. I mean, it's February, and that was what Webino was November of last year, October of last year. It takes time. And again, it's all about little wins. But the key of it is, if you start at the UX design, and you start having the conversation of, you know what, we're going to paginate first for these new pages. We're going to reduce comments. We're going to change, we're not going to do these little thumbnails. We're going to, not go crazy on the Ajax. At the point of design, the conversation of optimizing is a little bit easier because the design is already starting with performance in mind.
So the question I had that was a little bit before that one, I thought when you use media queries, it allows the CSS to branch off and serve different bits to different screen widths, basically. So you wouldn't have to have the same giant font downloaded, let's say, by using the same HTML across different
All
spaces.
the media queries do are override. They're override. They're overriding CSS.
So all the same stuff downloads.
And if you look at where the media queries are traditionally at, they're on the bottom of the CSS page. So the CSS, when the DOM tree, geek out a moment, this is my geek warning. When the DOM tree, when the browser actually renders a page, it starts from top to bottom. What does it render at the top? It renders a CSS, and then renders at the top to the bottom of the page, then uses the media queries, which then overwrite the CSS that it already read. So, same CSS, no performance gain.
So in effect, it does double the work.
It does double the work, and not only that, when things hide, it's just displaying them, which means it just hides it. It's still loading, and it's still loading through the same HTML page. Like how, all these little cute little Ajax windows that you put up on your browser, you know how they work? They're actually loaded into the page at the bottom, and you just never see them until you actually click the button and it says, oh, display, yes, please display. So the content's already there when you got there. Okay, so remember I do bar mitzvahs, I do parties, I do weddings, go home performance. I'm going to do a shameless plug here on my book, just because you're all sitting here on pins and needles and I don't do shameless plugs. Rick, our sales guy, was here, and he's like, I'm going to put these beautiful cards on all the tables. If you don't have a card, there's a card on my new book, Mobile User Experience. And there's a card on Speedier. So if you want a card on both, please come on in and get one. Let me actually talk about the book really quickly, and then we can go to dessert, and I'll do a time check. Oh, it's 8:14. That's pretty good.
We still have some more time for questions if you're willing.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, please talk about
I'll talk about the book, and we'll probably take some time to raffle it up. And, my shameless plug, always. It's a beautiful book. Look how wonderful it is. It's so glossy. It's 4-color. Ooh.
You know, would you ever deliver that on a mobile device?
It is actually available on the Kindle. It's available on all major, iTunes, Google Play. If you buy now on Amazon, I'll show up, deliver to your house, sign it. So, one of the great things is, about 4 years ago, and I want to thank BostonCHI for this. So 4 years ago, I did a class at BostonCHI, and I had so much fun doing it. And I had an editor at Morgan Kaufman hunt me down. And they were like, I really like that talk. You should write a mobile UX book. And I was like, I got way too many things to do to write a book. She's like, no. Literally, I got a call from the next person. You don't know me. And that was the person no longer works in Morgan Kaufman. But you should write that mobile UX book. So 3.5 years go by. One day I go back to sleep. I wake up, and I'm like, I know how I would write a mobile UX book. I'm like, I have a great idea how I would write it. The morning of, I get a call from the editor at Morgan Kaufman who says, look. I know you're going to say no, but let me try it one more time. And I said, you know what? I actually was thinking about that last night of how I would write it. How would I actually write it? I said, awesome. Want to write it with us? I said, what do you think about it? I actually got approached by someone in writing, and the editor almost mauled me. And then I went to their booth at a conference, and I'm like, I don't want a chicken on my book. And actually, it's funny, they released a book about mobile UI patterns, and there was a rooster on it. And I was like, I didn't want to see the Latino guy with a rooster. Come on! I've been a laughing stock of all my friends, and they're like, really? They're like, what, you didn't get the duck? I was like, come on. So, the concept of the book was how best to describe mobile UX. And the issue is, the key of mobile UX is what I refer to as a trifecta. There is development, there is usability, and there's UX. And they're all interconnected. So how do you tell that story? And the story was, I wanted to introduce a series of these beautiful mobile patterns. These basic patterns that are just design patterns and UX patterns of how apps and mobile websites are built. You know, the menu that slides out, paginated pages, deep links. And I said, but it's not just that. You've got to add a little bit more. So you've got to introduce the topic of how UI elements work in mobile. And not only that, you've got to introduce how wireframing is different in mobile. And so think of it as like a series of bookends. You've got the patterns in the middle, and on one side, we're talking about why mobile. The book talks about how to use the UI elements. It talks about how to actually wireframe. You introduce the patterns, and then I wrote about how to prototype, and then how to make the decision. Do you do mobile web? Do you do responsive web design? Do you do a mobile app? And then we talk about performance. So I also included a bunch of wireframing tools. So at the end of the book, the editor was like, wow, you know you can add more stuff. And I was like, oh, I can add more stuff? So I actually did a pile of really cool prototyping templates that you can cut out, photocopy, trade them, collect them all. And look at that. Well, that's pretty cool. And then there's actually the UI elements you can cut out. And I introduced techniques that I actually floated to my friends and colleagues in the UX community that were like, hey, this is how I use prototyping. What do you think? And they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. So that's in there. And not only that, last minute, I snuck in the iOS 7 UI. So this is probably the only book that I know of that has the UI elements for iOS 7, and it has some of like Android 2 in there. And so if you really want to see how these different elements work, how the interactions work, how the gestures work, they're all in there. So I want to thank, that kind of got messed up. I want to thank BostonCHI for having me. Thank you. And I'll take more questions after this, more questions on the book. And Morgan Kaufman for actually delivering 5 beautiful copies that we're going to raffle off today. And I'll leave it signed. If you want to give me a friend, I'll even write a personalized note, to so-and-so, you rock. I was talking to a creative director at Sapient like this week, and I said, hey, Barry, you want to read the book? He's like, I love it. And so he came in, he said, can you sign my book? And I signed it as Barry Rocks. And he was having some of his creative team that looked at me and said, did that guy just sign your book? I said, yes. And he said, look, let me show it to you. I rock. It's like, and someone else wrote it. Someone else wrote it. It's not for me. So, okay, so we've got wonderful books. And I am willing to take any other questions that you want on the book if you want.
Did it warm up? My question was, with fonts, I can imagine with the enterprise world and then choosing these specific, really heavy fonts. When you're going to mobile, how are you convincing them to, dumb down their fonts so that the speed will be there?
Well, remember, what was one of the 3 things that I said? Anyone remember number 2?
Test prototypes.
Test prototypes. Build a prototype with those fonts build a prototype with one font, measure them, and turn around and say, what would you like? The one that takes 10 seconds or the one that takes 2 seconds?
Yeah, but branding people are really fond of their fonts still.
The great thing about it,
They don't want their font to be short.
and you know what? When the page, and so there's a part of this funny, conferences that I go to, there's one called Velocity that's about web and, web optimization and the dev team, dev teams and network optimization, so and so. There was a great presentation from Etsy. And what their dev team and the performance ops team did is they published Etsy's performance on the blog. And they said, you know what? We're tired of trying to convince people that things have to be faster, things have to be slower, so they put it up on the blog. And every time they did something, they would update. And every time they tried something, they would update the pages. And it got to the point that the CEO started looking at it and keeping an eye on the blog to say with a little piece of pride, we're making things faster for our customers. Nobody ever in a C-level or business wants to say, my customers are having a terrible experience here. So the power of the prototype isn't about telling the story to us. We know that things need to be faster. The developers know things need to get faster. You go to the mobile product manager, you go to the CEO to say, this will make things faster. And look at the Amazon, for every 100 seconds, they get, 1% around. And that's the key critical thing. That's what the power of the prototype is, to be able to publish them, be able to tell the story of before and after. We make things better because you don't want to be the piece that someone finally goes up to you and says, hey, I measured you. And you are terrible performance. And then you're scrambling to try to make it better.
I've got a question.
Sure.
So it's a little, I guess, specific, but in terms of mobile usability testing, what solution do you have for when you're trying to observe the screen and what the person is doing and maybe with a mobile device?
Well, there's a couple of funny different things. There's the one that I've seen where it's you put the camera on the person's head and you're kind of doing eye tracking. Eye tracking doesn't work on mobile. It's just as much as everybody thinks. It's just you look like a crazy person. You're like, can you wear this funny hat for me and see what happens? Part of what I recommend is just observation. Is literally, looking over someone's shoulder, having them do a task, and timing them to see how long the task is. The old-fashioned way. Just time it. And part of the power of why I started talking about performance is with usability studies, we were really about when it took someone to click on one thing and when it took someone to click on another. And that is an actual number of when a user clicks. What the missing story is, if it took them 10 seconds to click on something, but they didn't really see the button for 6 to 8 seconds, how do you know that your UX was actually correct or your usability was actually correct or not?
I just wanted to add on to your answer. One of the things I found very helpful when doing mobile testing, you want them to hold it in their hand and you want it to be natural, but if you take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of blue paper and tape it to the table that they're sitting at and say, please rest your hand here, you can get something very close to a natural usage, and you can have a video camera focused on that. There you go.
Find my book. It's in here. I know.
You should write the next book.
Yeah.
I'll get the chicken.
Any other questions?
I know the editor. They'll be like, I'm sorry, the chicken is, you're getting the wallaby.
I'll get the gefilte fish.
Exactly. Again, I already know what my next book is going to be, and it's probably not going to be on performance. So.
Cool. Any other questions before we raffle? And if anyone did not get a raffle ticket, now's your last chance. Come on up.
All right, get them on the hot. And remember, if you don't win a book tonight, you could always buy one on Amazon. They're awesome.
Ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Last question, and I don't know if it's too off topic, but I was curious about testing e-newsletters. Testing e-newsletters, I don't know if it's too off topic.
You know what? So her question was, what about testing e-newsletters? And remember, e-newsletters are web pages. So one of our biggest customers, the URLs they gave us, was their newsletter. And that newsletter took 11 to 12 seconds to load. Those things are pretty much it. An e-newsletter is a content directly to that one person. If they don't get that fast enough, and they're asking for it, and they're asking it to be delivered into their inbox, it's just as terrible UX and terrible performance, just like a website. So we test those up, and those are critical to test. What you do is you would actually enter the URL for like the non-email one. There's a way to do it through the mail thing, too complicated, but if you actually enter it, into like the URL version of it, you'll measure it.